Bon après-midi. Good afternoon. We've been together for almost 2.5 days, and you've all worked hard. We've all worked hard. The organizers, you as participants, the facilitators, and I think the facilitators need a really big hand of applause here, having brought this together as well. Thanks for applauding now because you can't boo after the presentations. Okay, so we got you. Just kidding. This afternoon should answer 3 questions for all of us. 1, what really happened at this conference? What were the key ideas that were generated? And we'll have the facilitators report on those. But some of you might feel, well, there's based on what we heard, and we weren't in that group, we think there should be other things that should be considered too. So as soon as they've finished presenting, I'm going to open the floor and, of course, access our WebEx participants to ask you if there's anything missing from what you've heard. And we'll invite you to do that. Of course, we have 120 minutes to do that. And that's an average of about 40 minutes per theme, right? Which we're going to try to respect because at 3 o'clock, I'd like to invite the tri-chairs to close this so they can share their impressions with you as well as talk to you about the specific next steps. Where does this process go from here? Plus, how do we engage? How can we stay involved? How can we be part of the solution? Everybody in this room wants to be part of the solution, right? Whatever you do. Whatever you do. So we're going to try to answer those questions. And some answers that we actually might even provide ourselves might not be as clear as they could be. And that's the work that needs to be done beyond this conference. You don't solve a tough problem like this in one conference. But you lay the foundation and bring the voices in and consider what it is that you've contributed and put together that leads to something that's going to improve how we do this. That's what this conference has really been all about. So this afternoon, again, we'll have a presentation, open the floor to questions. We have the overflow room. We have WebEx participants. Get your ideas. We'll note them all. By the way, the other thing I want to say is I think on most tables there's a pad of paper. If we run out of time and there's a lineup of 22 people at the mics, I'm going to have to say sorry because we're going to run out of time. But I'm going to ask you to note your ideas. There's going to be a box on your way out that is going to actually be the box in which you can put those ideas in, and they will be noted. Okay? So if we run out of time, that's plan B. Okay? But if we have the time, we'll input and invite your voices to share your views directly. Now, as many of my colleague facilitators have shared with you in the breakouts, when you have something to add, in the spirit of trying to get as many voices as possible, be as sharp, brief, and concise as you can be. Okay? Because we also have note takers who are noting everything that you're saying. All right? So try to be as brief, concise as possible. So that's our afternoon, and we hope to get you out of here by 3:30. We know that there's a shuttle leaving for the airport at that time, and you know we have planes, boats, and trains, and whatever else, however else you're getting home to your loved ones. Alors ceci dit, nous allons passer cet après-midi pour vraiment voir le résultat de cette conférence, les idées qui sont dégagées, que vous avez suggérées. Pour ceux et celles qui n'ont pas participé dans les séances, dans toutes les séances, vous allez entendre ça. Si vous avez un point de vue à partager au-delà de ce qui a été dit, elles seront bienvenues. On va inviter vos idées, on va les noter, et ça fera partie de la conversation qu'on aura eue au-delà de ces 2 jours et demi. Sans plus tarder, I'm going to start with surveillance, to continue with guidelines and practices, and close the afternoon with education and awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, Alain Rabot.
Thank you, Daniel. Comme Daniel a préparé la matinée ce matin, il a dit qu'on poserait 2 questions. De quoi a l'air le succès et qu'est-ce qu'on a besoin de faire pour cheminer vers ce succès-là. Moi, j'ai posé une question préalable qui voulait savoir est-ce qu'il y avait des points additionnels à soulever sur l'état courant, l'état présent en termes de surveillance, puis ce qui est fait cocasse? Monsieur le technicien, see if you can move the gain on it. Thank you very much. Oh. Now we might get feedback with this.
No, he'll turn that.
All right, good.
You're good?
Where was I? You may regret this. Alors, on a commencé ce matin. J'ai posé une question additionnelle vis-à-vis des 2 questions que Daniel nous avait encadrées pour la matinée. Puis je voulais savoir s'il y avait des points additionnels sur l'état présent en termes de surveillance. Fait cocasse qui s'est produit, on a rapidement dévié vers quelle est notre situation désirée dans un futur préféré. Qu'est-ce que ça a l'air? So we quickly looped into what does success look like, despite my efforts to try to get more data in terms of our current state. So we tackled the 2 questions, and the first question was on what success looks like. There was a whole bunch of ideas that came together, that came out, and I've kind of, I think, summarized in a very quick paragraph with a couple of key points. What we hope to achieve, what does success look like, is a surveillance approach that is systematic, it's across all provinces, and it provides timely, accessible information about risk and how the risk evolves over time and space. Bracket or parenthèse. It's a shift from a surveillance system that's kind of static and kind of retrospective to one that is more predictive, is I think the essence of what's being expressed there. There's a couple of key points that you'll see coming back in how do we get there question that's going to follow up in a minute. And one of the key points that came out was we need to leverage the citizen scientist and his or her presence in broadening our data collection and increasing our efforts, and the byproduct of which we know is increased awareness and increased education writ large. There's a desire that we need to quantify the risk and how it evolves over space and time, and that's the research dimension to it, if you wish. There was also some discussion about having a better case definition for surveillance and being more defined in that respect. There was also several questions, and it came out time and again in our conversation around the use of best practices. There's some good best practices out there that we may or may not be leveraging with respect to surveillance. So why don't we leverage those and make sure that we take advantage of it? That conversation around that desired end state took about 45 minutes, and we then looped in after a break into the how do we get there question, which really evolved. And those of you that were in the room, this may not be, because it wasn't written that way on the flip charts that I generated, but as I looked through the flip charts, there were 4 themes that jumped out at me. And the first theme is I will call it the system of Lyme disease surveillance. And that's perhaps the biggest theme. There are components to it. I'm going to list about 6 or 7 to the system side of things here. It came out late in the conversation, but it came out very clearly. We need to have clear common surveillance objectives across all provinces and across the variety of federal government departments that poke at this issue of Lyme disease. So clarity of surveillance objectives. We need to have, here was a quotable quote. Somebody in the room said, "We suck at sharing information." Okay? So the idea is to unsuck at sharing information. So the second point is around the feature of the system is our ability to be able to use and share data across the system. System meaning the provinces, federal government, and other levels of government, as we've seen in some of our conversations around surveillance. There are 2 conditions here that we started articulating, and one is around we need to have governance on this because our governance system around this is not working well. So the governance issue came up, and the need for standards, data collection standards, metadata standards, and so on around making sure that we have that compatibility in the information that we gather, that we gain. We also talked about, to create this, we need coordination. And coordination's the easy one, but we also need funding to be able to do this, to coordinate our efforts and to make sure that we come up with something that is consistent and useful. Let me come back to the theme a moment earlier that I spoke a moment earlier about leveraging the citizen scientists and citizen participation. There's quite a bit of discussion and some really great examples that were shared in our room around how this is done, kind of outsourcing or crowdsourcing that kind of information, data gathering. Recognizes that there are some caveats tied to that, but it is an essential element that we think we should be leveraging on this. A sub-theme to the citizen scientist is that notion of perhaps leveraging those that work in industries that are in close proximity to these reservoirs of Lyme disease. People that work in parks and recreation in municipalities, people that work in the forestry industry. I could go on, but that's a compelling case that you've got a captive audience there that are exposed to the disease that can act as all sorts of data collecting mechanism, awareness raising, and so on. So that was two elements that really tied under that notion of leveraging those other resources. There was another one in terms of another group that was also expressed as essential in maintaining, and those are veterinarians who've got perhaps the best system in place right now. We need to continue tapping into that, and that is an essential element to a surveillance mechanism. We had a bit of a conversation around the need to establish a baseline level of surveillance, because the reality is that it is impossible in this tiny country that we call Canada to do effective monitoring and surveillance around the entire territory. It's just too big. So we talked about a need for baseline sentinel sites. We need to make sure that we're transparent about what sites these are, the data coming out of those accessible, and there are many qualities that we talked about that were also essential to that. We also had quite a bit of conversation around the need, and as a matter of fact, that's where the whole conversation started for us this morning, is leveraging new technologies. There's all sorts of emerging technologies out there that can probably revolutionize how we can do surveillance. We had some examples this morning, and certainly we need to leverage those. So those were all the elements that talked about a system of Lyme disease surveillance. That's how I've captioned it under this particular theme area. A second theme area is I'm calling risk communication. And there's a number of pieces that fall into the notion of awareness. So on est allé jouer dans vos plates-bandes encore, Kathleen. So we ended up talking about that to some degree. But we talked about how risk information and risk maps are currently drawn and how misleading that can be. And the fact that a risk map may just show as a red dot on a map doesn't really speak to the fact that that ticks are fairly mobile, and that there's decreasing areas of risk around that particular area. So we talked about that risk maps have to be more like a topographical map that shows concentric circles around those high-risk areas that show that the risk is still present, but maybe not as prevalent as been monitored to date. We also had some great conversation that there is no such thing as zero risk, and the corollary to that is that low risk doesn't mean no risk. So we had quite a bit of conversation around that, and perhaps that also needs to be transmitted as a message within those maps. We talked about signage, standards for signage, targeted locations for signage. There's some things that are easy to pick, particularly in the high-risk areas, and also the fact that many of you highlighted, a couple of you highlighted, really sound existing resources currently around Lyme disease. There was a poster that's I don't know if it's still in the overflow room. It's still there. Thank you, Stephanie. So there's some information and some public awareness information that is readily available. We also talked about, particularly around the fact that some risk maps are being misused. They're being used by some to generate tests or prescribe tests, diagnosis, and follow through on insurance claims. And we talked about it this morning, that's somewhat of an inappropriate use of those risk maps, because those risk maps are really research tools. So we talked about printing or putting a disclaimer somewhere on those risk maps that said this is for research purpose only. And there's several examples that were raised over the course of our conversation. And then, of course, the notion of risk communication is all around trying to drive behavior change so that those that do expose themselves to risk do so in a smart way, do so in an educated way. So that was part of the conversation, kind of drifting into the awareness part. There's two other themes that I want to talk to, that we talked about this morning that I want to deliver here. One is around research. We had quite a bit of discussion around research, and what the point that we landed on is we need a surveillance research agenda. And we don't know what that's defined as yet, but we know we need a research agenda on that, and guess what? We also need the funding to go along with it. There is also existing research or prior research that ought to be, should be, must be leveraged. We can build upon les acquis, the things that we've got in the past. One of the short-term projects that was identified fairly early, and this came from the presentations that we got from our guest speakers yesterday. They showed a variety of heat maps from at variety levels of an échelle, how do we say that in English? Scale, at various scales. And there could be a very quick, very simple project, perhaps with a graduate student, to assemble those maps together to show that risk in a much broader way. So that was one thought of what could be done in the short term. Yeah. Still on the research topic, there is also a point made that patient and advocacy group representation in the development of of surveillance protocols, methodologies, is valuable and indeed desirable. So that was something that was reflected in the conversation. The final theme on surveillance is, and so far really I've focused in how I've presented this really on the surveillance, and that is of the reservoir of the disease, particularly in ticks. We also talked about surveillance of the disease in people. And we talked about closer, better patient monitoring, recognizing that there are severe limits that are imposed by privacy legislation. We also talked about physician reporting, and we need to improve that. And that we agreed was going to be a rather challenging issue to tackle. So we didn't get into specifics on that one, but we really identified that. And we certainly also talked about, under this banner or under this theme, the need to do monitoring of co-infections. The folks that were in the room with me, I hope I have done justice to the conversation. Thank you for your participation.
Is there anything missing in terms of what should be considered in the context of surveillance? Est-ce qu'il y a des choses qui manquent, qui devraient être considérées? The microphones is...
I was in the surveillance for much of it, and I think that was a great summary, but there are a couple of things that I thought could be emphasized a little bit more. There were several points made about the need for transparency of the information as well as patient input into the design of the protocols, I felt. And also I thought that the emphasis was a little lower than it was perhaps what was discussed about the need to monitor all Borrelia and all co-infections as that are reasonable.
Okay, thank you. Pass the mic. Are you going to handle the mic?
Dogs also contract Lyme disease, and they can carry ticks in to the home where people can get infected as well. And therefore, as dogs are quite susceptible, and so are some other pets and stuff, it makes sense to test the ticks on the dogs that come into the vets to find out, to give a better indication of the true surveillance that's out there. As it stands in BC, vets have been told by the BC CDC for years not to send, they contact vets saying, please don't send us more ticks.
Okay.
And on top of that, as of last year, they implemented a hefty fee to check, identify the ticks and test them. And this fee, I was told, was $120. So you pay the vet to see your dog. You pay for $120 for testing. Therefore, it's much cheaper, more economical, and much better for the pet just to treat, which is why they do tend just to treat. So we
Thank you.
need that addressed.
Great, thank you. Two more here, go ahead.
A good idea to maybe expand upon is using things we already have on television, such as like Amber Alerts or weather reports, like something similar to that, where when we figure out where areas are high risk, maybe just scrolling it across the bottom of the screen and letting people know.
Okay, thank you for that. Last point in this room for now. We'll come back, of course, but for now, go ahead.
I would like to be able to call my public health unit tomorrow and to be counted in. So I would like to have kind of a count me in program that if you have a positive test result from a different lab B, that you can be collected into the data and a certain subset, here are the people that actually have confirmed in Canada, here are the people who have confirmed elsewhere. And this speaks to Dr. Hatchett's concerns around maybe we're missing something else, but I'd like to be counted in.
Thank you. Is there anyone on WebEx who has something to contribute?
Thank you. Bill Baker is our next question. Please go ahead.
Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As far as surveillance is concerned, my concern is the fact that unfortunately in Ontario, the doctors are severely persecuted by the College of Physicians and Surgeons for diagnosing and or treating Lyme, so therefore they don't. Therefore, the information is not passed on to the Public Health Agency of Canada for the people that are being diagnosed because they are not being diagnosed. Our doctors in Ontario, I would ask that the Public Health Agency please list the doctors in the Toronto and surrounding areas in all of Canada who actually do treat Lyme and are not persecuted by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Maybe a document such as this could be in the hands of Jim Wilson of CanLyme, and he could post the information on his website. But it's very difficult to get surveillance on active when doctors won't treat, diagnose, or report to the public health clinics.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there somebody else on WebEx who would like to contribute another idea?
Thank you. Our next question is from Caroline Stagel. Please go ahead.
Go ahead, Caroline.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Oh, perfectly. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, my comment is regarding veterinarians. It was brought up that they're an excellent resource for surveillance, which I really think is excellent. I just want to make the point that there are also quite a few veterinarians who need to be educated about Lyme. I personally had an experience where I brought my dog to the vet with a tick embedded in her head, and the vet was just as dismissive and condescending to me as my former GP was about my own Lyme diagnosis. This vet wanted to know if I was reading current research, and he was very, very condescending. So
Okay.
I want to say that most vets are very knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than doctors, but there are some who really need to be educated.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll pass that on to the education and awareness group as well. Anybody else on WebEx who'd like to contribute an idea?
Thank you. Our next question is from Doris Owen. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have 2 points. One, high school science classes could be used for surveillance, and they would cover most all of Canada. And second point is that perhaps we could have patients themselves who know where they were bitten or the area they were bitten and or might have been bitten.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other idea in the main room?
Surveillance is what drives active surveillance, and while we now seem to do it through positive tests, we should also be doing it through testing that is not necessarily positive. If there's clusters in areas where people are being tested because they think there is a possibility, then that should be actively surveyed.
Okay, thank you. Next point. You've got the mic.
Going on further from that, I would recommend that the case definition for diagnosis and surveillance needs to be rewritten with their separate objectives in mind.
Put your hand up. Oh, you got it. Good.
I just want to point out on passive surveillance, 2 weeks before Christmas, I submitted 2 ticks that were on our neighbor's dog. And when they got to Winnipeg, they identified them as being winter ticks, which were not carriers. So they did not investigate any further to see if they were infected with anything. So I think we are doing a good job with passive surveillance, but I think some improvement needs to be done.
Okay, thank you.
What I'd like to say is, just quickly, earlier in the research room, what was stated is that the people that are being bit by ticks, could there be a correlation with their blood type? I know that might be far stretched or outrageous, but is there a preference to blood type 1, 2, or 3 to the individual patients that are being bit?
Okay, thank you. Question noted. Next person, please.
Personally, I think that surveillance is the least of our worries right now, and it needs to be accepted that if an infected mother with a tick flies over the border, you know, there's no border control there, and they land wherever they want. You know, your information is always going to be not correct because within 1 year there's going to be 200,000 ticks in that one area. I mean, it's going to be unbelievable. So we just have to accept that it is here, and it's all over the world except Antarctica. And we need to move on from that and accept that it's more than the black-legged ticks. It's in dog ticks. Right. I live in Canmore, Alberta, and I have never personally seen a black tick. Okay. So, and I know there's 24 people at least in the Bow Valley that have Lyme disease. Are any counted? No. Okay. We need some kind of system. Right. Let me keep focused.
That's okay. A system to do what?
We need to just accept that it's constantly changing its form. Mm-hmm. There's constantly new bacterias and strains that are being found very quickly on a rapid basis. Okay. We need to understand. It's got to be based on symptoms. Okay. And people and.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Thank you for that.
Thousands of people right now that are suffering in Canada.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to move on. Thank you. Any other points in the room? I'll take 2 more, and then we'll have to move on. Go ahead.
Right now, we should stop using the current surveillance guidelines to restrict patients from diagnosis and treatment. We should ensure that healthcare practitioners and patients are made aware that negative test results do not mean that it's impossible to still have the infection. Lyme disease should be a clinical diagnosis.
Okay, thank you. I'll take 1 more, and we'll have to move on. And the others will have to note their ideas. Go ahead. One last person.
Let's break down the silos in the medical community. Lyme and co-infections.
Is this on surveillance?
Yes, because when patients present to their doctors, it will be confusing because the symptoms of Lyme and co-infections can mimic the Parkinson's, psychiatric problems, scleroderma, Alzheimer's, ALS, arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, multiple systems atrophy, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, diseases that you say there's no known cause, no known cure. Patients with these problems should try and be considered for Lyme diagnosis.
Okay, thank you very much. And those of you who haven't had a chance to express your views or any further input, any further ideas, please note them, and we'll capture them on your way out.